Welcome to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. I'm Dan Rowe, and I've masterminded the ascent of local favorites to global dominators. This isn't your usual get-to-know-you chat. We're diving deep. We're revealing the raw truths about franchise wealth building. With over 30 years in the trenches, I'm spilling it all. If you have an appetite for unfiltered tales and the hidden blueprints of franchise prosperity, buckle up. We're diving in. All right, welcome back to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. And today, not ashamed to admit it, I'm a bit nervous and intimidated by today's podcast. Look, what would you do if Al Copeland handed you $1 million to stay in the company? You ricked it up and bet on the dream with only $37 in your pocket? When I first got in this business, Outback Steakhouse was the high watermark. They did things differently in so many ways, took so many chances, and it worked. People loved the concept, everything about it, and they enjoyed massive amounts of success. And today I've got one of the founders, Tim Gannon, who wrote a terrific book called Blooming Adventures. I binged on audiobook and really enjoyed it. Your background is terrific and very relatable. I like the way that you told the story, very rags to riches, in a way that a lot of people can relate to it. And I found a lot of what you went through, a lot of what I went through, in a lot of ways, down to the Catholic school. But it was well told and definitely a must read for anyone who's looking to start their own business. So we're going to get into it, from the ripped $1 million check to the blooming onion empire, Tim Gannon on building Outback, the Partners Program, and what any new concept creator must know. So welcome, Tim. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So why don't you dive in really quick about your story up to Outback, and then we'll start playing around with the Outback-ness of it.
Well, my story was I was a kind of a typical liberal arts, Florida State graduate from art history. I had a wonderful time at Florida State. I studied an extension program in Florence, Italy. I became a tour guide at the age of 20 years old in the Uffizi Gallery, lecturing on Botticelli, Michelangelo. I mean, it was really, I thought I had peaked, at such an early age, and had so much fun being in Italy. Had a Triumph motorcycle going off to Greece and cross Morocco, and really just incredible adventures. Didn't have a lot of money, but I knew how to have an adventure with little money. So then, after college, I came back to the States and I said, I got to get a career now. That all was fun. I mean, Florence and tour guides, but art history is a very difficult field to find a career in. So I went to Aspen because I wanted to learn how to ski. And I got a job with a French chef there, Michel Poumet. I met him at the bar and we were speaking French, and he said, I need help because I don't understand English very well. And I said, well, I don't understand French cooking very well. So let's shake hands and let's see what we can do. So we became two partners, a French guy from Marseille, France, very, very talented. And we cooked at the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies. It's a think tank, and it's wonderful. We did about 80 dinners a night, and it was coq au vin and all pheasant and very exotic French food. We made croissants from scratch. So I learned how to cook, and it was a lot of fun. And I skied during the day, cooked at night. And so I, just kind of taking the year off of working on a career. So after that, I said, I got to get back to the career of business. It was 1973. It was probably the most difficult year to find a job. It was the oil embargo. Gas stations were open for 2 hours a week. Nobody was hiring. And so luckily, I found Steak and Ale, restaurant business. Restaurant businesses seem to survive, sometimes thrive in bad times. So Norman hired me at Steak and Ale, and I transferred to Rockville, Maryland. And that's where I met my partner, Chris Sullivan. And I just said, wow, this is going to be fun. He's a very great guy. He's got a vision. He runs the best restaurant in all of Steak and Ale, the best numbers. He runs it like a but one of the things I noticed about Chris, was he has fun, while working in this very difficult business. He knew when to take off and when to enjoy life. So I always remembered that. So from there, I went to New Orleans, was transferred there, and I worked for George Beale. Many people don't know George Beale, but he's the founder of Houston's. He's the guy that made Houston's what it is. It's a single proprietary kind of concept. And George and I worked together, became great friends. And one night, I'll never forget this, we went to dinner at LaRousse Restaurant. Warren LaRousse was a 2-star Michelin Guide chef. And we went to this restaurant and we're there having this beautiful food, coquille Saint-Jacques and oyster artichoke soups and all this beautiful exotic food. And George and I looked at each other and says, why don't we do this type of food in casual dining? And that stuck in me from that moment on. And George went on to create Houston's, and the idea of doing chef-inspired food came from that dinner. So that was what New Orleans brought to me, was an understanding of flavor and how flavor can be transmitted into casual dining.
Wow. And so you were with George before he even started Houston's. Houston's is, I mean, they're an unbelievable operation. Like, what do you think it is about Georgia, that operations, that gets it right? I'm actually having dinner there next week on Wednesday at Houston's.
I've never met anyone who doesn't like Houston's. It's a phenomenal restaurant. George is a fanatic for quality. I mean, I'm telling you, working with him, I've never met anyone in my life more passionate about food quality and execution. Hot things hot, cold things cold. Those slogans that he taught me early on about how to measure quality, how to identify it, how to get what we call exacting standards. I mean, I can eat a bloomin' onion today and tell you if it was cooked at 342 or 349 temperature. That's knowing your products to exacting standards. That's what George was.
I mean, your email address is Chef Tim. Like, at the core of it, you're a chef, you're a food guy. And I mean, that matters, right? Like, at the end of the day, what makes Houston so successful is just exactly what you think you're going to get every single time. It always tastes the same. And I remember with the blooming onion, is like the blooming onion, that thing is just delicious. But the fact that you can tell the difference between the oil or the oil temperature and the oil cleanliness is like, most people can't.
Yeah. I mean, I was at a table once and a blooming onion came and I picked up a petal. I could feel a little bit of the oil on the leaf. I said, guys, this is cooked wrong. And they said, well, how do you know? I said, it's at 342. And they said, there's no way you know that oil is 342. So we went back and got a biothermometer, which is an exact tool to tell you to the 10th degree. So it was 342.5. I apologize to them about being off by a half a degree. But, and they think I walk on water. It's not walking on water. It's just knowing your product. That's all it is. It's knowing what your product should be and making sure you execute it perfectly so that it is that.
Yeah. Well, the thing that George and Houston's has in common with obviously your success with Outback was a maniacal focus on the quality. I was lucky. I met Paul Avery when you guys were young and only a couple locations, and he was kind enough to let me tag along and pick his brain. One of the sessions that he took me to is you guys were making bloomin' onions in the kitchen, and it was being televised by all your restaurants. Like, all the other restaurant managers, kitchen managers were watching. So even though it was on the menu, you guys just kept going over it over and over and over because, I mean, that was an important item and you got it. I mean, that's sort of what made you guys stand out over everyone else.
Yeah, those were called serious food meetings. And I titled those to let people know that we're damn serious about the meetings, and about how we approach our food, the exacting standards, about how we recreate flavor every time, and how we check on it with, we do line checks before every opening, go through every single product before it's served. And we take the whole management crew stops what they're doing and spends 30 minutes every day going through and tasting the temperatures, the flavors. And it's really A lot of it, you don't catch a lot of things wrong, but you're educating everybody about what flavor is.
Yeah, you get where you focus on. So let's talk about, let's get into Outback, but first, like sort of that your moment where you finally joined those guys, because you left some good money on the table to take a very risky risk with a couple young kids at home.
I feel nervous even going back to that moment, to be honest. People say, why didn't anyone know that about that moment? I said, because it was such a moment filled with anxiety for me. I'll never forget it. I was $250,000 in debt, 18% interest, 2 young children. I needed that check more than anybody, But, I think it was the moment that I went from, and this is the big lesson here, is from being transactional to being strategic. If you can live your life strategically, I'm talking long-term planning, I'm talking, like thinking and dreaming of the future, make your decision today about where you want to be 10 years from now. And I made that decision that I wanted to make my money with someone, not for someone. And that was a very important lesson, because I knew Al Copeland and he would pay me well and do all of that, but it would always be kind of his money and what he would give me, and I was uncomfortable with that. So I wanted to make my money with someone, and I knew Chris Sullivan was the guy. Because I had known him for, 15 years before that. We stayed in touch through all of my adventures in New Orleans. He always would come and seek me out and see what I was doing. And he was always impressed with my ability to bring in great chefs and design great menus and produce great flavor.
You were like the third leg of the stool. No, there was 4 partners, right? There was 4 partners. So explain that, and like where you fit in, where, what leg of the stool you were.
Yeah. Well, there were 3 sort of operations. There were 4 partners. Each one played a different role. And I think that's what's important, is to learn what role you're going to play and how that's going to spin out. There was Chris Sullivan, and Chris, for those, he was very strong leader, incredible, sort of alpha, whatever, and had great ideas on marketing and, when to go public, how to raise money. He was really good at that. Bob was very good at streamlining operations to make sure things went well. I was the flavor person. I developed flavors and created the menu. All the menu items came from my hands. And Trudy Cooper, who was the 4th person, she was really in charge of the front of the house and service and keeping fun, making sure everyone's having a great time, making sure the spirit of Outback is alive and fun place to work. And so, she would do all the decor for the restaurants, and she did it in a very fun way, going out shopping, finding, Australian artifacts. And, we didn't have a design team. It was just us.
How did you come up with the idea how did the idea of Outback come up, that it was going to be this Australian themed concept versus anything else you could have done? And how did you become a partner?
Well, Chris invited me to become a partner with him. And, I'll never forget the meeting we had. And the lawyer said, Tim's going to have to make a capital contribution for this partnership. And I go, oh, shit, here we go. So I said, what are you looking for? And he said, well, something like $10,000 to contribute, So I said, I don't have $10,000. So Chris immediately pulled out his checkbook, wrote a check for $10,000, and to this day has never asked for it to be returned. And we didn't do any paperwork on it or anything. And so that's the kind of partnership we had. I tore up $1 million check to go work for it. So when you're willing to risk that kind of money to put into a partnership, it means a lot. It really means a lot to say, hey, you got my back, I've got your back.
When you guys left Steak and Ale and then had the idea, so tell me how the whole idea for this Australian thing came, and then some of the things about Steak and Ale and the way you guys were wired, had to have made it into the new concept, but probably some things didn't too. Like not being open for lunch or whatever. But like, how'd you guys kind of come up with this whole thing in the first place and make some of the decisions that you guys made?
Well, there's no question Steak and Ale was in the back of our minds that America loves casual themed steakhouses. That's a love affair that Americans have, and moderately priced. And Steak and Ale was very interesting. It ran with a 3-man kitchen, a cook, a dishwasher, and someone who filled up the salad bar. And it was incredible that how Norman Brinker brought that efficiency into kitchen labor. Unbelievable. So we kind of knew we wanted to be dinner only, casual theme, wood floors, people can eat at the bar, no rules. And, we knew what we wanted. We just didn't have a name. So Bob, one of my partners, went out and on a Sunday afternoon watched the movie Crocodile Dundee. And we came back and we kept talking. We couldn't come up with a name that everyone agreed upon. So Bob kept talking about the Outback, Crocodile Dundee. And so we said, let's look at that in a mirror. So somebody wrote it in red lipstick on a mirror behind us. And we said, wow, Outback in red looks great. So that's our name. So then I had to do a lot of research on what Australian food was. And it's difficult to find products in Australia that would fit the American palate, that Americans would crave. So it was it was the throw of the dice to see that could we pull off a sort of New Orleans style menu with an Australian name, and do an Australian steakhouse that no one's ever heard of, that Australians are, they have beef and they have steakhouses, but they're not known as the number one steakhouse country in the world, not like Argentina or Brazil or some of these other countries. So that's really how the name came about. And, and to be honest, no one ever really pinged us for being Australian and not doing Australian food. I was kind of shocked to see that no one criticized us for that.
I was thinking it was just lucky timing that you guys opened with this name when Crocodile Dundee came up, but that was really the inspiration, was Crocodile Dundee.
Yeah.
That's great. But you guys you think about when you guys opened compared to all the other places out there, you guys had like really, really bold, craveable flavors. I mean, you have to take some chances in coming up with some food that's that intense.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Norman Brinker came to visit us after our second week that we were open. He brought all of his executives. He said, let's go see what my Chili's boys, Chris Sullivan and Bob Basham, are up to. So they all came in, about 8 of them, and they all sat at a table. And Norman said, well, guys, what did you think of Outback Steakhouse? So they all go around, well, Norman, the decor is really rough, and the site selection, we had a restaurant across from the funeral parlor in this sort of dilapidated shopping center. And so site selection wasn't premier. Norman said, well, what did you like about it? And they said, you know what, Norman? We like the food. The food had a lot of flavor, and they season everything. I mean, their croutons were fabulous. 17 spices on buttered croutons. So, so Norman said, guys, I think they're on to something. And Norman said he did the research on consumption of spices over the last 10 years and saw that it was moving up. And he said, guys, I think they're on to something. I think we should pay attention to this whole issue of flavor.
The mere fact that you talk about your croutons, of all the things on the menu, a crouton that you talked about, the 17 herbs on a buttered crouton, right? So like, that's just a very chefy thing. And you think if you paid that much attention to your crouton, like how much attention did you guys put on the ribs and the chicken and obviously the bloomin' onions? Those things had really, really deep flavors. And then even the stuff that you would dip your food in, like the dip for the wings or the dip for the blooming onion, like they just tasted really, really, really good. And I don't know, like it at the time when you guys did it, it was like nothing else.
We took everything serious when it came to flavor, to peeling the skin off the cucumber, to cut down on the bitterness of a cucumber, Everything was important. There wasn't one thing that didn't merit special attention. The Caesar dressing. We used Reggiano Parmesan cheese in the dressing. I don't know anybody that was pouring Reggiano $7 a pound cheese into their dressings. And Reggiano, we were the largest consumer of Reggiano Parmesan cheese in the United States of America.
Wow. One thing that I remember too is I like sitting at the bar. So I would sit at the bar, watch a game, get some food. And it was the first time I ever had Foster's beer. And I remember the mugs were so freaking cold. They weren't just cold, they were ice cold. So when you'd pour the beer in the mug, your beer would ice up. But like, that's just another nuance and another detail. It wasn't just a cold beer. You were reminded every sip of that cold beer because ice was trying to come down your throat.
I remember that. Yeah, George Beale taught me early on. He said 60% of all the complaints about food come from temperature. He said, so if you can make cold things cold and hot things hot, you will have avoided 60% of all of the complaints that people have about food. It's a small detail, but once you focus on it and you realize how temperature dictates, so much of what we feel. If you taste soup that's cold and you're just like, gosh, what is this?
Yeah, no excuse for that. When I think about Al Copeland Sr., I just keep thinking time and temperature, time and temperature, time and temperature. He must, I don't know, it reminds me. But so what do you think were some of the other things about Outback that made you guys stand out at that time? Like at that time, it was new and it was different. What did you guys do that was sort of out there that people seem to love?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that we did that no one was doing at the time. People had tried it, but no one had did it successfully, is we initiated what was called the Manager Partner Program, Proprietor Program. And this is why we won the Entrepreneur of the Year trophy. And it stands right back here that I get to look at it. Entrepreneur
Nice.
of the Year. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, is to receive that award. So there's two things about that. The Proprietor Program was we would have managers write a check for $25,000 to buy a 10% interest in the cash flow of their restaurant. So that $25,000 could equate to, after they sold their 10% back to us when they retired, they would get stock options, and those could equal, probably sometimes when the stock was rolling good, they could go over to $1 million. So for a $25,000 investment, somebody could get $1 million from that investment. That was incredible. But more than that, it was the fact that these guys were owners of the business. They signed a 5-year contract. They owned the business. And that gave them not a sense of arrogance, but a sense of pride. And that sense of pride allowed them to take care of the business like it was their own. It was their own business. So that was huge. That's probably one of the smartest things we did that really paid off. And, that's why we are awarded Entrepreneurs of the Year, because we changed the way management was considered in casual dining.
But you think about it, you guys got wealthy helping people get wealthy. You changed a lot of lives of people who normally would have a, career as a manager, or multi-unit manager, something like that. They could do that for 20 years and sort of go up. Companies tend to pay you as little as they have to keep you. And in your case, these people made money that they never saw before, right? Like you changed the trajectory of their kids' lives, like with some of these big checks. And I've heard stories about a unit level person that got bought out and then he became a multi-unit. I forget what you call that person, but he then was a partner of a region and he got bought out. And it's like, that's amazing amounts of money. And it wasn't for you guys. It wasn't like, I want to pay people as little as we have to keep them. Yours is like, sky's the limit. Let's go. Right. And that had a major impact.
I think that's the core of what Outback was. And who I credit all that with is Chris Sullivan. I think Chris understood how to incentivize people. I think he really knew how to do that. And he came to the table understanding that. And that went from managing partners to joint venture partners. And joint venture partners, they had probably one of the sweetest deals. They own 9% of their entire region with a $50,000 investment. So you could have 20 restaurants and they own 9%. So that's like they own, X amount of restaurants themselves with a $50,000 investment. So they got bought out in millions of dollars. And there is probably, 30 or 40 of them that we bought out, and they all became multimillionaires. So they're very happy. After writing the book, I just got one today from Tom Kempsey. Tom is the head of R&D for Margaritaville, and he was with us in Cheeseburger in Paradise with Jimmy Buffett. Tom said, "You changed my life, taking me to New Orleans. I took him to Florence, Italy. I took the entire research and development team to Florence, Italy, and we stayed at the Ferragamo Villa, and we be entertained by all the chefs from Italy. And the trip was sponsored by Reggiano, paid for the whole trip, and then Salvatore, who we buy his wine, he underwrote all the housing for us. But it's amazing what we did for these guys that were R&D people, and we allowed them to take their wives also. So it was, those are things that you're right, normal companies just don't do.
Well, and give someone listening to this some advice, because I know people are like, well, I wouldn't do that, because what if you spend all the money on these people and they just go leave and they compete with you, or, my feeling is like, well, what if you don't? Like, what if they don't leave? But I don't know, like why did it still make sense for you to invest in these people, knowing that it might not pay dividends for you?
Never came across our mind to wonder why. We did it instinctively. We were kind of like, the Rolling Stone. We did everything by instinct. Dinner only, we were out in suburban areas, not always in the cities. We had a lot of fun at conferences. The concerts we put on for our managing partners was incredible. So, and we enjoyed it. We enjoyed all of the conventions as much as they did. I mean, it was like, a phenomenal group that just loved being around each other. Everybody, when you're successful, you're happy and everyone's making money. Everyone's, high-fiving, and it's a great feeling to know that you're opening a restaurant in Boise, Idaho, and it's going to be a huge success, or Japan, or franchising, or Brazil, and all those franchises we did that worked so well.
Like, what are some of the things, because of that program, that the GMs had to put up with and deal with so you didn't, or the joint venture partners, because in business, always there's something breaking. But the JV partners, what are some of the things, because they were your partners, owned it and kept that off of corporate's plate? Like, what's the validation, the reason for making someone a partner? I mean, it makes your life easier, right?
It does. I mean, how do you develop and build 160 restaurants in 1 year? How do you do that? Well, you don't do it from a corporate office. You do it regionally. And each one of those guys is armed with the credentials to pick out real estate, hire a construction company, and get the restaurant built, and so they were able to do that. So instead of us building 160, we had 16 guys out there building 10 restaurants. That's how it worked. And you're not paying that corporate overhead. We never had a human resource department until much later. There's no HR department. We had no lines. We had no recruitment company trying to recruit people to be general managers. We always had a line waiting out the door for people that wanted to join our company, much like, companies like Chick-fil-A. They have years of people waiting to join them.
Yeah. No, that's great. And one thing you said earlier is about real estate. What I remember about your real estate is every time I would see your site, you were in the right trading area. You were in good trading areas, but you guys took like B locations in the end cap of a strip center. But to make it stand out, you'd wrap it like in wood, or you'd wrap it to stand out from the rest of the strip center. And so they still look like really cool spaces. This place near me in Northern Virginia. And it was, you couldn't get in it. It was, people would line up, took an hour, to get into these places. But I thought it was so smart that in the beginning, you guys were taking what looked like relatively lower cost build outs. I mean,
Yeah.
eventually you guys wound up building, freestanding and getting in the real estate game. But in the beginning, like how did your real estate strategy serve you guys well in the beginning?
This was the genius of a guy that was our CFO, Bob Merritt. Bob said that what we needed at Outback to help, keep Wall Street, respect to the investors, was a 2-to-1 sales to investment ratio, 2-to-1. That means, say you're going to do $3 million in sales. You can invest 1.5 million, and that's, you got to wrap the lease up into that figure and do that. And then you wrap up decor and all that. So that meant that unless you think you're going to do $5 or $6 million, you can't go get that and, this freestanding building. Believe it or not, when we diverged and got a lot of those freestanding buildings because they're sexier, that's when we ran into some economic wobble within that structure, because we left that formula, that strict financial formula that worked so well, is a 2-to-1 sales to investment ratio, which gave you a 25% return on investment, which was incredible.
What are some of the other things about the partner program, back to the partner program? Like, would you recommend doing that today? Was there some unintended consequences you wish you maybe did a little differently? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What we did, early on, it was probably one of the decisions. We were transactional instead of being strategic. Transactional means, okay, we got this guy 5 years. If we can get this guy 5 years, and we'll be really happy with a 5-year contract. And that's wrong. That was the wrong thinking. We needed to be thinking 30 years, that he would be a proprietor with us for 30 years. Because what that did was, when we started having to buy these contracts up, then we got into what's called stock option overhang. That means you're giving out too many stock options. So, we would have thought that out a lot differently in the beginning and done something totally different that was more long-term, in its thinking, to keep people in their spot and to provide for them an incentive package that can be a lifelong package. It should be. I mean, there are a lot of people still with us 35 years, that have been with us from day one. There are those 30 years, 25 years. So there are people that are willing to commit, their career life to you. That's an incredible commitment. But you got to offer them something, a way that they know they can send their kids to college and, live the American dream.
Yeah. Well, you guys had a great culture. I remember when I would take those rides with Paul, he referred to your team as Outbackers, sort of in the same way that like Disney refers to their employees as cast members, right? So like, what were some of the things that you guys did to, aside from compensation, to create that kind of a culture and get people really fanatically focused on your brand?
Well, you're right. A lot of it was in how you label people. Our Outbackers were the employees at the time. Our partners, managing partners, were our partners. I mean, to call someone, hey, you're my partner, that's kind of one of the nicest things you could say to somebody. Or you're an Outbacker. You're not just an employee. So trying to move away from those cold corporate labels like employees, managers, corporate vice presidents, moving away from all of that and getting a vernacular that works was part of it.
What were some of the other things that you did, like with your partners? I remember seeing somebody's name on the front of the door, right? Or you'd give them a business card and they were called partners. And I don't know, like one time I actually sat at the bar next to the father of the partner, and he was just so proud. Like he was just talking about his son and being the partner there. And I don't know, it was just different than someone just being a GM.
Yeah, probably did. One of the most powerful things we did was put the partner's name over the front door. What did that do? That came from Australia. In Australia, that's how they do that. They put the owner of the bar and the tab in the restaurant over the doorway. So you know when you're walking in, hey, I'm going in to see Dan. He's runs this place. He's a great guy. I remember, in New Orleans, people say, hey, I'm going to Galatoire's. You've got to go see Leon Galatoire, or Ella Brennan. You go saw people that own the restaurant. That was very, very important, is to know who you're going to go see when you go there. Almost as important, the food or anything, but hey, I'm going to go see Dan. He runs this place. He does a great job. He's going to take good care of us. So that probably was one of the, things that didn't cost us a penny, that changed the definition of the proprietor and gave so much pride to people when they got their name above the door.
Yeah, I agree. Anything that you would have done differently in that? Was there a sense when you guys were growing that maybe you were growing too quick, and how did you catch up, or how do you guys course correct?
Wow. Good question. Probably international. There was wobble on the international market because we didn't quite understand some of these marketplaces and how complicated they were to be successful, like, China or Japan. Like Korea, we figured it out because the average size of the Korean is 140 pounds. And, that's quite different than Americans. So we had to change the whole menu, and we created what was called family dining. So you took a big entree and you just, served it to the family, shared food. We learned that from the Koreans, how important sharing all the food was on, not just the bloomin' onion, but that was kind of the magic of the bloomin' onion, is you put an onion down in front of 6 people and everyone gets a bite for, $1.50 a piece or whatever it is. You're having a nice appetizer. It's shared.
So if you go international, you better learn your market. You can't cram a round peg in a square hole, right?
Well, the biggest thing about going international or going into a market that's, say, a little fuzzy from what you typically know and understand is you got to have the right partner. I mean, we had, for instance, in Brazil, we had a guy, Peter Rodenbeck. Peter was a Harvard graduate, but more than that, he was married to a Brazilian woman, spoke fluent Portuguese, loved Brazil, and he had developed McDonald's before that, so he knew all the pitfall. He was the perfect partner for Brazil. Now, Brazil has 170 restaurants, all of them jamming, every single one of them in Brazil jamming to, like really packed full, with a great culture down there, very, very dynamic culture. And the same thing in South Korea. We had a guy named E.T., and E.T. was unbelievable of what he would do as a franchisee to bring people into Outback. He would rent a bus and go pick up all the American soldiers from the local army base and bring them into Outback. He would do just incredible things to animate his restaurants.
Yeah. So some of the notes that I've taken from this chat, the important thing is we don't want to forget the role that luck plays and everything, but you came together with some really good partners at the right time, but you got to have the right partners. Your culture, I mean, was it something that you guys wrote down, or was there something like, where'd you guys learn that kind of a culture?
Well, a lot of these things don't happen spur of the moment or off the top of your head. They're well grounded. Norman Brinker had, what he had was his 10 guides to success. And, they were high energy, friendliness, honesty, they're all the things that are going to make you successful. So you borrow from that. But what we did, I think, was early on, we said, we're going to be hiring people we don't know. We're going to be hiring people that we don't know their backgrounds or whatever. And we need to give them the tools of what it takes to run Outback. So we created a document that was really only 6 pages, I think, long. And it was called The Principles and Beliefs. And in it, it showed all the things that we owe our Outbackers. Seek to understand before being understood. That was a very, very important one with them, with our Outbackers, is to listen to them first before why are you so late, whatever. So that was one. And treat them with integrity and with respect. and make sure that our guests treat them with respect also. The second one was the whole part that respect toward what we feel about our guests, the fanatical hospitality that we need to show them, the quality of food, and all the things we're committed to the guest. And the third part was to our investor. So we had three parts of this thing: was how to, make the investor feel that he's respected. But the first one was the commitment was to our Outbackers. They were the most important part of this thing, and that included our managing partners. And the second one then came to our guest. But the first one was really think about your employees first. Think about your Outbackers, your managers, because if you take care of them, they're going to take care of the guest. So, it flows, from them first into the guest, and then the guests are taken care of and they're happy. Well, the financial guy's going to be happy. The financial results are always going to be there.
Yeah. But if you focus on making the financial guy happy first, the rest of the downline suffers, because all those guys do is grind.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Outback was top line sales. We were top line sales group.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, top line sales means people are voting with their wallets. Like they're coming back, repeat customers are profitable. And, but you said a word hospitality, and it reminds me the difference between eating and dining. Right. And so what does hospitality mean to you? Because I feel like not enough people focus on that now.
Hospitality, I learned it from, I was just on the phone, somebody who's still working at Commander's Palace. I learned it from Ella Brennan in New Orleans, Louisiana. She had a $20 million restaurant in the middle of the Garden District of a neighborhood in uptown New Orleans. Stream volume like crazy with no parking, zero parking. And what she did was she would go to each of the neighbors, knowing that she's going to be parking in their driveways and all over, and it's going to be messy and sloppy. So she gave each one of her neighbors a key to her restaurant. This key opened a door. It was the guest door into her restaurant. When that door opened, that's the people that were at that door were seated at the next table. And so you had a key to a restaurant. What more can you get as a neighborhood gesture of hospitality than getting a key to your restaurant? So I learned a lot about, hospitality from her. If you went into a restaurant and one person had a bad meal, she would write a check for the entire group and then invite the entire group back to her restaurant. And if she overheard someone was in the hospital, the next night, that person had, a tuxedo waiter with duck à l'orange served from in the hospital room. That was her outrageous hospitality. And we tried to bring that to Outback, to where, people felt that when they came in, that we were taking care of them, all the way through the dining experience. That whatever we could do, there were no rules. If you wanted to split a steak, if you wanted whatever you needed to do, that we were going to try and do our best to make this the greatest dining experience you've ever had.
That's awesome. I know many of the Brennans. I'd never heard that story about the key and the private door. That's amazing. But I could see them sending a tuxedo-clad person to the hospital. Like that's just how they roll, and that's doing things that people don't expect, right? Like a little lanyap or whatever they refer to it as.
Well, I remember I took my mother to the brunch at Commander's, and my mother, she said, "God, I love jazz." And so Ella sent a jazz trumpeter to my mother's table, and he played The Saints Come Marching In 3 inches from her eardrum. How soft was that? 3 inches just for her. I mean, where do you get stuff like that? And so, we tried to have, imbue that into the culture of Outback, where, think of what you can do for your guests. Think of what, when it's special, how to celebrate their times and, how to make them feel special.
Yeah. And then one of the other things I wrote down, obviously, is this partner program and all the many. It's like you drop a pebble in the water, it makes a lot of rings. Like that partner program paid huge dividends. And when you think about it, you're not really giving them anything. They're making it, right? And they're making everyone else in the meantime.
That's the magic of it. You think you're coming up with something that's going to cost you money. In fact, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
And I hats off to people like Chick-fil-A. They have multiplied that concept, and they're beating the tar out of most full dining restaurants, casual dining, and all because they've learned how to incentivize people.
Yeah. And then the craveable food you guys came up with, it was just the flavor of everything that we had. It wasn't like the same note of flavor across the whole menu. Everything had distinct. I forget the thing I used to get was the ribs and the chicken, like Alice's or something like that.
Yeah.
But then
Alice
you're eating,
Springs soup.
then you're eating the apples, like you had the apples as part of the thing. And I don't know, it just was like this incredible burst of flavor throughout the entire meal. And it was great.
I had fun. The cinnamon oblivion, we had a cinnamon oblivion, with cinnamon croutons and caramel ice cream, and the croutons were made with cinnamon. It was, and then a caramel sauce over the entire thing. It was so much fun. The chocolate thunder from down under, we made our chocolate from Royal Viking Swiss chocolate bars and melted down the chocolate, and then added the vanilla bean extract from Madagascar. Just incredible fun that we had. Because of I had chefs from New Orleans, Warren LaRue, who was helping me later on, on some of these menu items that could make this food so exotic and fun and wonderful.
Well, and you seem like you're still curious about food. I mean, your email address is Chef Tim. Like, are you still sort of keeping your tool sharp?
Yeah, I am. I think the search for flavor is always there. My girlfriend Shannon and I always experiment with the latest seasonings and spices, and what tastes better than this, and how to create the perfect seasoning for ahi tuna, all of that. And I'm just got off the phone with George Rowe, who is our chef, and we're may collaborate on a cookbook, with all the flavors of New Orleans and all the things we've done. Yeah, no, it's in my blood, so it stays there.
Well, and some of it found its way to your son's restaurant concept. I love Bolé. That food's delicious.
Yeah, Bolé is fun. It's a chef inspired food into that kind of fast casual restaurant where you don't expect to taste these things, but people, that's when I say, hey, my son's got Bolé, we love that restaurant. They don't like it, they love it. And I'm very proud of him and what he's doing. He's got 22 of them up and running now, so he's doing really well with it. And the other thing, I'm doing now is I'm starting a speaker series and going out and talking about, because I think it's important to have learned these tools of how to grow and scale a company, but then to go teach them, go teach people, and so they don't make mistakes. I mean, the simple thing that I wished I had known early on was how important picking the right partner is, how important that is. Had I known that at 25 years old versus 40, I wouldn't have wasted my time with a lot of these. I mean, all of those concepts, the World's Fair, I learned a lot. But learning a lot and being successful are two different things. So I would choose to be successful and keep learning along the way. And the way you do that is you do it with partners that that you trust. Partners that carry your flag. That's the key. Do they carry your flag at the end of the day, or do they find fault in everything you do and try and knock you down?
Yeah. No, and I'm glad to hear, like, I think your speaking is timely because our industry, a lot of concepts are started by really great people doing really great things. And then you have a liquidity event, and sometimes the people that you sell to can't keep that going, right? So like, and I'm trying to be careful with my words, but there's a lot of really, really good concepts that are essentially destroyed when private equity gets their hands on them, that need someone, because all the secret sauce of the brand's gone. They're all cashed out. All the good people leave. And they need someone like you to help them figure out how to get true north again, right?
That's exactly right. You get, the financial group comes in. They have a predetermined rate of return they need for their investment. So they need it's going to come out of the skin of your concept. And when they, for 5 years they're in, and after 5 years they're looking to exit. Well, when they exit, it's not always easy. It's not an easy exit. And so that's what happens. And so those companies that are left with high debt, high interest rates, they need help. And the way to get help is through great, flavorful food, attracting guests all back into your restaurant, and learning how to deliver value. Delivering value is, the key pivoting thing in knowing how to price your menu. Those are the things that I could help any company with.
Yeah, value's not the price. It's the plate. It's like, because some people feel ripped off with a $2 cheeseburger. Some people happy to pay $30 for a cheeseburger. And that's a good segue to my second to the last question. I just got two more questions. Is there anything about 2026 and what's going on today that leads you to believe that someone like the four of you couldn't do this all over again?
Well, that's a tough one. I think the four of us, people like us, could always do it again. When you match up the talents of food flavor, financial expertise, operations, I think you match up those talents will always work. Whether it's Tim Gannon or somebody else that has that knack for flavor, or Chris Sullivan that has the zeal for how to go public and how to raise money. I mean, it's hard raising money. Chris had a special way of going out to do it. I mean, we raised $2 million early on, but we had to give 18% of our entire company for that $2 million, but that's what we had to do. That allowed us to get to the next stage, which is an IPO. And then, we got all that back. But, that was what a heavy price we paid for $2 million.
And yeah, but you could argue you might not be there without the $2 million, right? So
no question about it. In none of us, I don't think anybody at the table says, wow, I wish we hadn't done that. No, you that's the thing. You can't look back, and you can't, you look forward. You look forward and to see, what is it if we did it again? What would you do different? How would you do the managing partner program? You'd still do one, but how would you do it to where it can last?
Yeah. So the last thing, so if this was an episode of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, what are some of the spoils of your success? What are some of your passions, and what have you done? What good and indulgent have you done with your riches?
Well, I always wanted to be a polo player, and this picture behind me is that's in Spain, wearing the Outback logo, where I scored the winning goal, and our team became number one in the world in Soto Grande, Spain. We won the U.S. Open 5 times, and I'm in the Hall of Fame for polo. Polo was a thing I thought I could never afford to play, always wanted to. Started polo at 42, by 50 I won 5 U.S. Opens. So, yeah, there were some great spoils of all the success of Outback, and the biggest one was polo. But the other thing is, and all the friends I met, Tommy Lee Jones, King Charles, Maharaja of Jaipur, all these exotic people from all over the world that I got to meet. And I'm, at the end of the day, an Irish cook.
At the end of the day, an Irish cook. The coolest thing about the picture behind you is that not only did you win that, you won it with your team was an Outback team, right? In the Outback logo.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, polo is the oldest team sport in the world.
I didn't know.
2,000 years old. One of the original team sports. What you take from polo, you bring to business.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you very much. You've been generous with your time, and it's amazing that I even got you to do this. So I appreciate it. And I highly recommend this book. I could do like 4 more segments with you because, you just talked about a lot of good stuff. But where can people find out more about you?
Outbacktim.com. That's my website, outbacktim.com. And it's got all the things of the speaker series and things that I'm doing with my life, and how to buy the book, cheaper than on Amazon or whatever. But and a lot of other fun stories that are on that website that aren't in the book, that I'm starting to kind of punch out stories I forgot to put in the book. So I'm writing them up and putting them on my website.
Well, good. Well, you got a lot to be proud of, especially your son, Chris. He's a good dude. So thank you very much. And I will see you when I'm in Florida.
Thank you so much. Look forward to dinner. Thank you, Dan.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. I'm your host, Dan Rowe. If you enjoyed today's episode, this podcast is only going to get better. Please like, comment, and subscribe to hear more from the most successful franchisors and franchisees, and we'll see you next time.